Hi there, my name is Bruce, and welcome to episode 11 of Startup Diskie's Full Tech Chat. Now, as usual, I am joined by Jay. Hello, Jay. I am joined by Dana. Hello, Dana. But we also have a very special guest today, Steve from Mac84. Hello to you, Steve.
Hello. Thank you for making that check clear.
You are most welcome. The funds will probably be there. Now, today's episode is about tech fails. Now, this, I think, is going to be a really fun one because there have been some absolute crackers throughout history. And I think probably to start off with, what we need to do is classify what a tech fail is. And so ultimately, we're talking about a piece of tech that gets released. It maybe promises to be the biggest and best thing in the world, but ultimately doesn't deliver and then ends up being a complete and total fail. Other ones can be where maybe a product is actually fine and okay, but then someone makes a massive mistake and then it fails as a result of that mistake. I'd be interested in the opinion from you guys. I mean, what do you guys think, is the classification of a tech fail?
I think it's something that is, something that's maybe like hyped up as like the thing that's going to change your life. Everybody will be doing this, and then
like
just
the Segway.
fizzled out. Like the Segway, yes.
Yeah.
They were talking about how it was going to be a whole new mode of transportation and cities were going to be revolutionized around this device. And then it came out and it's this guy riding this little cart down the road.
There was a college campus near me where like the teacher was on a Segway and the students were like throwing things at him. They had to stop using the damn thing.
Segway, I think Segway still exists as a company these days, but they make scooters now. Is that correct? Are they actual upright, weird, wheelie things there? They're not in production anymore?
No, I think they still are, but I don't think it's changed much. They made like a off-road version with these giant knobby tires on it and things like that. I think it's mostly a niche product for,
There was a tourism company somewhere. I might even be here in Australia. I'm not sure. I'm sure I've seen it where you can go on Segway tours. So you go somewhere, everyone hops onto a Segway and they then do a tour of the town or something like that on the Segway. So why did Segway fail?
I mean, if nobody knows what a Segway is, just look at those stupid quote unquote hoverboards that have the exploding batteries, and then just like duct tape a broom to it, and you got a Segway.
By this time, if I have done my job correctly, I will already have brought up an image of a Segway, maybe even a couple of images of the Segway in post-production, so people will get a clear idea of what they actually look like. I mean, it seemed like a cool idea. What was wrong with it?
Expensive.
Yeah, expensive. Wasn't anything like what people thought it was going to be. Didn't match the hype, I think, was the main problem.
I think it was a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it didn't really improve on anything that was already available out there. And maybe people just didn't like to travel standing up. Maybe that was the issue.
It does seem very awkward. I've never tried one, but
I think I stepped on one once. They had like a thing at like a theme park where you could try it out. And it just like was a weird thing where you leaned forward and it like kind of moved. But then your natural reaction is, I'm going to fall. So then you lean backwards and the thing moves and you're like,
It's one thing I think that certainly has happened with Segways is in terms of popular culture, they are definitely associated with nerds and geeks because I also have never ridden one. I can't say I've ever even seen one. I've never even been near to one. But in an episode of Family Guy, one of the geeky characters, he arrives in a Segway, and when he arrives, he thinks he's going to a convention, and he says, these conventions usually have Segway parking. And so I feel like there was a definite link there with Segways and nerds. So, okay, so the next one I'm going to cover is one that has actually had a fair bit of media lately for a number of reasons. I mean, it had a fair bit of media during its release, and it had a fair bit of media recently because of ultimately what has ended up happening with this product. And this is a product called the Humane AI Pin. Now, a pin, this is in Australia, we don't call them a pin. We would actually call something that you wear on your shirt a badge. But this was a little device that you wear on you. It's a wearable, and it had a little magnetized back so that you could take it apart, and then you could put the pin on the front of your shirt, and then put the magnet on the back of your shirt, and it would hold it in place. So this is a product that had, a fair bit of anticipation around it. And the reason for that is it was a couple of employees that used to work at Apple, and you can tell from the look of this thing, it has a definite Apple style aesthetic to it. And
it does look like a watch, kind of.
Yeah. And then these people basically, they left Apple, they set up this company, they got a whole bunch of, sort of venture capital, and they were ultimately creating this device, which they leaked a little bit of information about, what this thing is going to be. It's going to revolutionize the world, all that sort of crap. And ultimately, this is connected to AI, and it has a microphone, and you can ask it questions. Now, as you can see, it doesn't have like a keyboard or anything like that. So the way it actually worked is you could either talk to it, or another thing you could do, you could actually put your hand out in front of it, and it would detect that motion, and it would project a little screen onto your hand, and you could make gestures to interact with the device. It's cute, it's gimmicky and all that, but And maybe we're talking about something which could be potentially used for something in the future. But there are a few problems with this. First of all, I think it's sold for about $700 outright. But more importantly, it then also had a subscription fee associated with it. So you actually had to pay a monthly fee if you wanted to utilize the technology, i.e. it's connecting with AI. That was kind of number one. The other big problem with it was it didn't really fill a void. It didn't really do anything. I mean, what they were trying to say, what they were trying to tell you is you're spending too much time with your face buried in your phone. This is going to release you from your phone by having this thing, because you don't have to have your face buried in it. You can just tap that little button. That big square bit at the front is a button, and you could tap that, and you could talk to it, and you could take photos with it, and you could actually say to it, well, what am I holding in my hand? You might have a can of Coke in your hand. You say, what am I holding in my hand? And you could take a photo of it, and they'll say, you're holding a can of Coke, or whatever the case may be. But I just don't really think it filled a void. Everyone who's got something like this it can't replace your phone.
No, yeah. So what the hell's the point?
Yeah, that's right. But someone's already got a phone in their pocket. The way it was designed for sitting on the shirt there, apparently it used to get very hot on your chest. So it was a bit uncomfortable to wear. If you were driving a car and putting your seatbelt on, it would kind of get in the way of the seatbelt. And it was quite heavy. So if you were wearing a fairly light garment, it would have a definite sag in it. I mean, if you're wearing a jacket, different story. But if you're wearing just like a T-shirt, it's definitely going to hang down on the front of that T-shirt. But really, I mean, the biggest... Oh, and of course, the other thing is the little light interface where it has the keyboard projecting onto your hand. Couldn't even see it in broad daylight. And the other thing was it had a very significant lag. So if you would ask the AI a question, you would sometimes have to wait several seconds for an answer to come back to you.
But these aren't problems, though, if you're just alone in your parents' basement with too much money and you're just asking the questions all day. So, you don't have daylight. You don't have to worry about, battery life. So you're good.
The amazing thing is the fact that they got so far. They got to a point. They managed to bullshit people for long enough that they were actually able to go in and produce this product and make it and manufacture it. And by all accounts, the manufacturing is of an incredibly high standard. But to then end up with this device that no one can really figure out a reason for buying it. Why should I even buy this?
We see this a lot, though, right? With not just this product, but like, we are ex-Apple engineers or ex-Google engineers, and they quickly find out that without Apple's deep pockets and resources, it doesn't mean anything.
And without Apple's control.
Yeah, and I mean, look, this thing sold. People bought it and did reviews on it. Most of those reviews were fairly negative in nature. Our friend, Ken from Computer Clan, he reviewed it, and he outlined all the positive things with it. But at the end of the day, he didn't exactly give it a glowing review. And now the reason why it's in the news recently is because it's ultimately shutting down. So they are shutting down the subscription. They are shutting down that AI connection. So anyone who has bought one of these now has a little box that can't do anything. Maybe someday someone will reverse engineer these and find a way of making them work again. But ultimately, if you bought one, you kind of have nothing.
Well, it's a good nipple warmer. So
That's right.
Only if you have two.
yes,
Only if you have two.
We have two. I mean, look, I can only afford the one nipple warmer. We're gonna have to share. It's gonna be awkward.
Yeah, that's what the market really wants at the moment is nipple warmers.
I think this and the other AI thing could sort of be lumped together in a lot of the discussions here because they're like, you hit the nail on the head. Years ago, we carried around multiple devices, a PDA, a camera, a phone, maybe a music player and stuff like that. And as technology evolved, these things combined into, one or two items. And now we have one phone or one item that does everything. So, I understand people want to disconnect from their phone, maybe just want to go for a walk or they want to leave it behind. But a product like this is, again, one of these things that's a solution in search of a problem. Nobody said, I love AI and I need to be connected to the internet at all times, but I don't want my phone near me and I want a very short battery life and I want all these like other cumbersome things that come with this. And it
sounds like a dream.
Yeah, your phone needs to be within a Bluetooth range or whatever for this thing to operate, unless like it has a cell plan or some other dumb crap. So it's like, well, what's the point of having this thing on you if your phone's right there? And in all the videos I've seen, people will have it on there. They're doing a thing, and they're like, well, let's see how much faster I can get it from my phone. They whip out their phone, boop, boop, boop. They got the answer while that thing's still thinking.
That's exactly right. And so this is one of the things that people could actually achieve what they wanted faster and better on their phone than they could with this. Like, for instance, with the photos and stuff like that, or identifying things. And so its main marketing thing was that it releases you from your phone. Again, that's just not what people were asking for. They weren't saying, oh, I don't want to have to grab my phone to look this up. I want to be able to just say it. And it'll tell me, or I want to just be able to faff around with some stupid projected keyboard on my hand without having to reach my hand into my pocket and pull out my phone. It's just not what people were after.
It would be different if there was some sort of like a headset or something where you could talk to it and hear from it, like, and all these things, because then that's a proven way you could get feedback. You can provide like a message to it. You could get a prompt. You could have a conversation. You could get information. But this thing, it's like, oh, well, we don't have that. So there's a keyboard.
Like maybe if they built tech into a pair of glasses or something
or
like
headphones, or a phone, or some convoluted thing.
I get from a what's the thing? In an innovation standpoint, yeah, you got to try something. You might fail. A lot of the innovative stuff fails, like Apple Vision. They discontinued it. I don't have any other examples ready. Like
iPod socks.
You take a look at the freaking Tesla Cybertruck. I mean, the purpose is R&D. So this might have some really good tech in it. If it does, I don't see it, but it might be ahead of its time, prohibitively expensive, and maybe they'll revisit in a few years, and it might be everything they want it to be. But.
Well, this might be another reason that it was a tech fail, because until you put it in the notes for this show, I'd never heard of the damn thing. So
this is marketed a particular sort of person that has paid all the money for their phone, then decides they've got an extra $700 to spare for an extra piece of tech. This isn't your average Joe Blow that gets these. This is going to be marketed at people that want to be seen. It's going to be the same wankers that are driving around in Cybertrucks. I promise you. They'll be wanting to wear one of these so that they can show everyone they've got this piece of technology. So
what we need to do is we need to get an image of those, print out little badges, and sell them for $200, and so people will feel like they're special. and we get like $175 profit on each
I
one.
get what you're saying. We just make a whole bunch of empty ones. That's a really good
Yeah.
idea.
Perfect
Just
idea.
put a little bit of like sort of buckshot into them so
You
that
could 3D print them.
they look
Yeah,
heavy.
just-
Yeah.
And you turn the screen on, and it's a Tamagotchi. You know.
Yeah, like customize them by engraving a little face on it or something.
Steve mentioned that we can basically bundle these together, and we can. So this is another device. This is possibly even more pointless than the last one. This is called the Rabbit AI, and this had exactly the same premise, and that is that this is a device that is linked specifically to AI, and you can use it to interact with AI. They had a little wheelie thingy on the right there that you controlled it with. It's like a scroll wheel type thing. I think it might have been a touchscreen, but I can't remember exactly. But this one was even more pointless. And the reason is, first of all, it's not wearable. As you can see, it's big and bulky. So now you've got basically a phone in one pocket and this in the other pocket. This one was cheaper. I think it might have had a subscription fee, because it's interesting to say with the old AI Pin, Steve, you mentioned this, it did apparently actually have a cell plan with it. So it was talking directly to cell towers. It wasn't connecting to your phone. So you could technically use it all on its own in the way that, like, if you buy an Apple Watch with the cell.
Which is
plan
what
as
I
well.
was going to say. This stupid thing does fitness, it does music, it does like calls, text, everything that those stupid things don't, and they're much more expensive and more
I
limited.
know,
So
I know,
it's like,
that's right.
if
Yeah.
you really wanted to ditch your phone and you're like, look, I want to get text, I want to have Siri or AI or whatever bull crap you want to do, like you could just get something like this, pay your cell phone plan. But I guess you're not being seen enough. You know, maybe if we get like a nipple clamp for your watch or something.
Well, you just imagine these people sitting there going, "Oh, let's come up with a watch." I know Apple's already done that. All right. Oh, what about something that hangs off their shirt then? How about that? Well, yeah. No one's done that yet.
If we develop a toilet plunger that is sentient.
Now, the thing that's particularly funny about this device, one of the things that makes it so pointless. Now, this could be wrong. I will just say this straight off the bat. This information may not be correct, but it is my understanding that inside this little orange box is a device running the Android OS. So the device inside there is apparently based on Android. So it really is just another freaking phone. So, if you've got this thing, I mean, whatever this thing does, you could clearly just set up as an app on your phone.
Yep.
Load up an app on your phone to do what this is doing. So the idea that someone is going to walk around with this as well as their phone or instead of their phone, it to me, this is even stupider than the last one. So, yes, tech fail on this one, I think 100%.
I think if this was a cell phone, like an option to have this as a cell phone, people would buy it because it's quirky and it's interesting, because people like different form factors and they like to experiment. If the price was low enough, people would have bought this as a cute little fashion phone type thing. I could totally see it working in that regard. But if it's not a phone, then what the hell
that's
is
right.
the,
It's like
no one's going to walk around with a Palm Pilot anymore. Why would they walk around with this?
Yeah, that's right. We've got this thing here. It's a tiny little bit smaller than your phone. Well, it's probably a little bit bigger these days. And it doesn't do as much. And we think you should carry it around as well as your phone.
I would much rather have that miniature phone you have than that.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
People haven't carried a device that thick since the flip phone days.
Yeah.
Well, your right testicle is getting all the cancer. Let's put something in your left pocket so you can.
Yeah, you got to balance it out. Yeah.
Now, look, while we're on this topic, I mean, unless anyone has anything else they want to talk about with the Rabbit.
Not for this one, but I was going to, since you mentioned with the Humane AI Pin that it was more a status symbol than anything else, I think that ties in pretty good with the gold Apple Watch.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
That entire marketing thing was it was about status. It was about showing off in front of your friends and stuff like that. So, I mean, I suppose in some ways with that one, I cut it a little bit of slack because it wasn't trying to be anything else. It's like you look at it and think, who the fuck would pay that much money?
A lot of people did, apparently.
A lot of people did.
Yeah.
The store I was working in at the time had a lot of traffic from Brazil, and they were taking home 5 apiece to sell them back home. They sold like crazy. We had armed security for the shipments and all. We just had them coming in by the truckload, and they sold like crazy, and it was all great until after a few years you need a new battery or you crack your screen, and then it's either fly back to Florida or so it didn't really work out in that regard.
You when you look at something like a Rolex, which incidentally I think are one of the ugliest watches ever made, but when you look at something like a Rolex, that is something that is designed to last a lifetime. If something breaks down inside it, you go and get it repaired. And you could say that about conventional watches all the time, but when we talk about these sorts of watches, which are, whatever the wearable fitness trackers or whatever you want, we know that they're going to have a limited life. They've got glass screens that can get cracked, and it's not just a screen. Like Rolex, you crack your screen. It's crystal, but crack your screen. You just take that out and you can drop another screen in. With these watches, that screen is part of the digitizer and the LCD and all that. That's a lot you end up having to replace. And as you say, then you got batteries as well. And these things aren't really user serviceable. I mean, does anyone know if your battery goes on one of those, can you take it back into Apple and they'll replace it?
The gold ones, I don't know, but the newer ones, my battery went on this. They swapped. They gave me a little box in the mail. I gave them the old watch. They shipped me a new one. So I'm assuming they would rather just give me a new one than repair it. But I've seen the iFixit kits. I would never want to open one of these stupid things. But they're modular enough to a degree that I'm sure somebody could do it. But it's one of those things where it's not designed for a mere human to do.
Yeah. And of course, the other really important thing is the guts of these things. It's a computer, and it ultimately it's running an operating system. And every time they bring out a new one, that computer is a little bit faster. That operating system is a little bit more complex. The battery time is often a little bit better. And so you buy that $10,000 one and you're going to be using that technology for the rest of the life of that watch. It's not like it's suddenly going to have a faster CPU in it down the track. I mean, I used to have a Series 3 and I now have, I think it's a Series 8. The leap they took in terms of technology between those two is phenomenal. I mean, when I think about the speed and the power and the capability and all that sort of stuff. So the idea of locking yourself into that sort of technology for $10,000 to me is just absurd.
I think I can almost understand the very expensive leather watch bands by these fashion companies. If you're really into that, yes, get a band and it does all this crap, because at least that would theoretically work on at least another model of watch. But I mean, it just must be a completely different life people must lead where they could just oh, here's $15,000 for a watch that I'm going to replace in 6 months from now. It's it just doesn't matter to them. It's going out and getting groceries. So it's one of these things where I can't wrap my head around it, and I think it's absolutely asinine that someone would do that. But I think also Apple has adjusted the models that they had available, because at the beginning it was much more of this is a fashion statement. This is we're paying for our R&D, so here's all the most expensive models that we're going to have. And I think they really quickly saw well, people are buying this for fitness. They're buying it to get away from their phones. They're buying it for this or that, So I think they shifted in the marketplace and have tried to compete with the other folks like Garmin and all these other folks who have watches. And I think it really just shifted where their focus is. So I don't think they care as much, from the. I'm sure they would love the extra money, but it's I think it's also the stock. How many of these units of, let's say, a Series 3 or whatever that were gold plated? I know they have very tight control with their inventories and everything, but how many of those were left over when they announced the next generation or the generation after that? So.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I mean, when it comes to the Apple Watch, I mean, it comes up in a lot of firsts, but it doesn't necessarily come up in the firsts for watches. It comes up in the firsts for fitness trackers. So it's, I mean, it is competing directly with those Garmin's and stuff like that. And it is actually one of the most popular fitness trackers out there. So, they call it an Apple Watch, but really it should be an Apple fitness tracker. So,
yeah. And to be fair, I've had a watch now for, I don't know, 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I got my first one. I still, when I want to look at the time, I pull my phone out of my pocket. I still don't do this.
I definitely look at my watch for the time, but I've always done that. But I definitely think the gold Apple Watch, I mean, it fits in with some of these absurdly expensive things like Rolex watches as well. The ones where they've got solid gold, sort of metal on them, and they've got, diamonds in the face and all that sort of stuff. And they are just designed as a status symbol. Look at me, I'm wearing a Rolex.
Like
Look at me, I'm driving a Lamborghini.
You can pass that one down to your kid and their kids and their kids. All you need is a new battery. What's a gold Apple Watch Series 2 going to do 20 years from now, besides leak battery acid?
Can you melt down the metal? I don't know.
Like, the only thing that's really special about it is that it's gold, right? I mean, the specs on the thing, it's not any fancier than a regular Apple Watch. It's kind of like the 20th anniversary Macintosh when they came out with those. It's basically a PowerBook 3400 in a fancy case.
Yeah. Would you like a crummy PowerBook in a crummier case?
And it's just a toy for somebody who's got the money and wants to show it off and have it be the status symbol, which that's fine. If you've got that money and you want to do that, go right ahead. I'm not going to dog you for it. But.
No, if you have that money, tell us. We'll get an old Apple Watch. We'll paint it gold. We won't tell you. And you can just donate to our cause.
I call this the Krylon edition.
I figured that while we're on wearables, I thought we might move on to another one here. And I'm going to say a word here and see if you know what I'm talking about. Glass holes.
Yeah.
Okay, funny story about this. I was in, I think it was San Francisco around the time where this product came out. And my friend was there, my cousin actually, and we were hanging out at a bar or whatever. And it's in typical bar. There's it's nondescript, there's just a door to get in. And scraped into the paint on the door said, "No Google Glass."
Yes, so that is what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Google Glass, which sort of came out a few years ago. It was an experimental thing. I don't think it ever had proper commercial release. There were only people using it who had applied to use it or something like that. And they were basically a pair of spectacles with some tech inside them, including a camera, and I think they allowed you to, there was like a heads-up display as well that allowed you to interact with them and see what was happening. Google had always said it was never the intention of that device that it would take photos or video of people without their knowledge. The whole idea was there would be a light that would come on and there would be a reason why the camera would be activated. So, for example, you're wanting to get directions or something like that, you could activate the camera, it could have a look at where you were and say, okay, you're on this corner, you need to go down the road there, or something along those lines, for that augmented reality sort of experience. So Google had always, stood by that this is not meant to be an invasion of people's privacy. This is meant to be adding this sort of technology. But what became fairly apparent fairly quickly is that it won't take much for people to be able to hack that. Yeah. And do exactly what they want to them. So, just walk down the street, taking pictures of girls' backsides or something like that. And indeed, someone did actually hack it to the point where I think they had it so they could pretty much walk up to anyone, look at their face, check their face sort of on the internet to see if it was, match someone else. And if it did match someone else, then just sort of come up with the details or whatever details that they had access to. I don't know exactly what they were looking this information up with, but they were demonstrating this, and they were literally just walking down the street and picking random people and just sort of saying, "You're so-and-so."
Yeah, I think it was tied into their Google Plus thing at the time, which is another failure. But.
Yeah, it's on the list. And that was, I think that just scared the crap out of everyone. I mean, I think people were just really worried. And as you rightly say, there were a lot of people refusing entry to anyone who was wearing them. There were people actually in physical altercations. If someone was wearing them, there were people actually literally coming up to them and threatening them with physical harm unless they removed them from their face, or forcibly removing them from their face. And I think these are all the reasons why ultimately it was a tech fail. I think it was actually very good technology, but it was just the potential invasion of people's privacy was just way too much.
Well, I think it's important to think about the time frame. This was 2013, 2014. The iPhone had only been out a number of years. Smartphones with a decent camera had only been out a number of years with good video recording and everything. And I think people were still getting used to the notion of people pulling something out of their pocket that had a great camera on it and just able to snap your photo. And so I think there's this level of adoption and acceptance of technology based on products and things that we consider to be normal. And I think that it was just leaping way too far ahead of, yes, you could see I'm pulling out a camera and I'm about to take your photo and you might hear a noise or you might see me push a button. But now there's this thing where you don't know. And there's, hearsay of it could do this, it could do that. This is obviously, I think it was like a closed beta, then they released it publicly for a short period of time before they canceled it. And so it's this thing that you hear about it on the news, you hear this or that, you don't know what this thing is doing. It could be scanning your face, it could be doing this or that. And I think that, like you said, the technology of it, like to have a processor that's capable of doing this, a little display, and that's pretty neat stuff. But I think that, if they were to have strictly said, this is just something we're experimenting with, we envision a consumer level thing 5 years down the road or whatever, I think the public would have been much more accepting of that's not a real thing, that's just something they're playing around with. But they decided to stick their neck out there and it got a very negative response.
I think the name behind the product didn't help. I mean, it's not exactly a company that you put in the same positive sentence as the word privacy. So
I think it was really something like that was sort of destined to fail. And as I say, that's not because of the technology. That's because of its impact on society. That's probably the main thing with something like that.
We can't talk about the Windows Phone because Mike will pop in somehow and defend it.
Actually, look, the Windows Phone, I think the thing I love about the Windows Phone more than anything was the little marketing stunt that Windows did where they held a fake, funeral for the iPhone, which was supposedly going to be what would end up happening when Windows released a phone. It was going to see the end of the Apple iPhone. And I love that. I mean, it's a little bit like, these classic sayings that get said, throughout history where someone says, oh, no one will ever need a computer in their home or something like that. Throughout history, people have come up with these amazing sort of tech claims, these statements, which when you hear them later on, they're absolutely hilarious. And the idea that the Windows Phone would come out and end the domination of the Apple iPhone is very, very funny. But
yeah, it's one of those things, kind of like everybody except the most recent generations would love to go back in time to their math teacher and said, yes, I do carry a calculator with me everywhere I go. One of those things.
I don't know much about them, and I think, I feel like, yes, we probably would be better if we had Mike on the show to talk about this.
He swears by that thing.
He likes it. Yeah, he actually likes it.
I used it briefly once as a work phone, and it was not trying to be an iPhone. It was not trying to be an Android. It was doing its own thing, and for what it had built in, it actually did things very well. I think the problem is that it didn't have enough market share, so nobody was releasing apps for it. And so you have the same problem as the Apple Lisa, where it's like, if there's no third-party support for this thing, who the heck is going to use this? How can I use my apps or my documents with other things? So I think it was like a very interesting thing that they released, but I don't think there was support enough behind it. Especially you had BlackBerry, you had Android, you had Apple. It was too crowded of a marketplace. If they were to release that now, it might be a different story, but.
Well, it's a very interesting point you make, because, I mean, one of the things when it comes to any sort of adoption of a new technology is that concept of the killer app. And so the idea of there is some software that warrants buying the hardware. So, and to some extent the iPhone, initially the killer app for the iPhone was Safari, was web browsing. Anyone who had used a phone to use on the internet prior to an iPhone, it was a painful experience trying to use the internet with a phone. But once Safari came out with a pinch and, and zoom and all that sort of stuff, it actually made browsing usable on a phone. And that was the killer app. But then the next big killer app on the phone was basically apps. App Store, and millionaires being made overnight, people coming up with ways of using this phone that the designers of the phone had never even thought of before. And games on the phone, actually really good immersive games that you can sit there and play for hours on a phone. And so apps become everything. Apps become the most important thing when it comes to a phone, making sure that there are all these regular apps. Now, when Windows brought out the phone, they were getting all the developers on board. The developers were making their stuff for the Windows phone. But then when that market share never really took hold, a lot of those app developers ended up just turning around and saying, it's just not worth us putting the effort in for the Windows phone. And they just started not updating their apps for the Windows phone at all. And once that happens, it's a goner. You're not going to be able to sustain it. Yeah, that's right. And I definitely think that's what ended up happening. And as you say, I mean, by all accounts, I've never tried one, I've never used one, but by all accounts, that there was nothing really wrong with them. Okay, yes, they weren't an iPhone. If that's what you're used to, then bad luck. But yeah, it was mainly just the fact that they just never got a big enough chunk of the market that would keep those developers interested.
Another fun anecdote about that is a coworker of mine at the time where I worked had an old flip phone that literally rattled. There was something broken in it. She could hardly hear out of the damn thing. And for years and years, our coworkers and her husband were trying to get her to update the damn phone. So she finally gets a new phone. What does she get? Not an iPhone, not an Android, not a BlackBerry. She gets a Windows phone. And within the 1 year that she got this Windows phone, it was discontinued. And she was like, back to square one as far as, well, now what do I do?
She probably needs to, listen to advice from others, maybe. Dear. Someone must have really put the hard sell on her with that one. I can't imagine.
I guess so. I mean, I think they were so subsidized at some point because this was around that time where, you could spend less than $1,000 and get a very nice phone. I think it must have been like super cheap at that provider. Maybe because iPhones were only on AT&T for the longest time until the 4S or whatever. So, until then they were in Verizon, at least here in the US. So it must have been one of those, periods of time where either the price was right or, just that was what they preferred. But, talk about bad decision.
Okay. So you mentioned Windows Vista.
Yeah, sure.
I will definitely need some additional expertise with this because I can't say I've ever used Windows Vista, but I do know of the media that circulated around it. Ultimately, I think so. It was people were using XP, Windows XP, and the next step up from XP was Vista.
Well, there was Windows ME too, which I think was probably even worse than Vista.
Yeah. So I mean, you got ME in 2000, and then XP releases 2001. And it was very successful. I mean, they had service pack releases, updates, and everything. It wasn't until 2007 that Vista came around. So, I mean, XP was like very much everywhere. If you had a Windows compatible computer, that was the operating system you were on. Unless you were in corporate, some people were still on 2000 or whatever. But as far as the Windows world went, like that was the next big upgrade. It was like from 95 to 98 type stuff. It was the biggest thing. And
so there was phenomenal backlash, incredible backlash. Now, I as I say, as someone who's probably never even used it, I went straight from XP to 7. I've never really known what the complaints were. Do you have some details? Do any of you have any details?
Yeah, I mean, I lived through that because I bought a gaming PC to build in 2008. So it was, or it must have been the tail end of 2007. It was just as Windows Vista Service Pack 1 had come out. And so the biggest problem with Vista was it was released when it was released. It was buggy as all hell. You had a lot of these graphic requirements that a lot of PCs basic PCs did not have at the time because of that Aero interface that was like the translucent Mac OS 10 mimic type interface. And you had a lot of these things that were just basically requiring more modern hardware. And I think one of the snafus was Microsoft was saying, no, this won't run on these PCs when it actually could. And they still do that today with all their Windows upgrades. Oh, technically your computer's too old. You need to buy a new one. You could hack it and it'll run fine. I think the other thing was driver support, and just support for a lot of applications and games just simply wasn't there at the beginning, which is to be expected, for maybe like a new fancy, update or release. But it just seemed that Microsoft fumbled on that. Like, they just were like not ready or something like that. Because I did not play around with, I did not have the greatest experience with Vista, because when I built that PC, it was like just on the cusp of Service Pack 1 coming out. And I remember getting the disc in the mail because I signed up on my iMac running XP in a virtual machine for some free Microsoft seminar as a business. And the prize that you would get for listening to this garbage that they spewed on Internet Explorer 6, which I was doing in a VM, was a business license of Windows Vista. So that's what I used on my gaming PC in 2008. But I had to, because the graphics card I had gotten for that system did not have drivers for Windows XP. I think they might have for like XP 64-bit or something like that, but I was not willing to run that piece of garbage on that computer. So, I mean, they tried to do things with like widgets and clocks and all these little fancy things. And I think they just peeled that much back for Service Pack 1. They fixed a lot of bugs. I mean, to be honest, when that was updated, I didn't really have too much of a problem with it. It ran fine. But when the opportunity for 7 came out, I upgraded. And I didn't have many issues. But I've heard horror stories of people in IT of it just like, it's a 64-bit thing. Now it's not running this proprietary thing that we have. And I think that also led into it. Like, there was that massive shift of, the processor architecture going on at that time. Whereas if you had a 32-bit machine, you needed more memory, a better graphics card, and, people just weren't willing to shell out stuff for a computer that XP worked fine for. Why am I moving from this? It works fine. I'm just going to keep on using this until they pulled the plug for support on that, which got delayed several times because of such a fuss that everybody made.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So ultimately people just sort of hung on to XP, and then Microsoft was sort of forced to continue supporting it because people weren't embracing Vista. It's interesting because this really does follow on to our last episode where we're talking about software updates, and of course, if you've got something that works and then you do an update and it doesn't work anymore, then that, people are going to get pissed off. So.
I mean, even now, you see an ATM or a billboard that crashed and it's Windows XP. They're still running it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have 2 proofing machines at work that they're not connected to the internet, obviously, but they are both driven by Windows XP machines.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that hardware that is like an embedded system type deal that runs like JSet Assign or something like that. And there's no reason to update the OS if it's just doing its thing and it's just designed to work that way. Maybe it can't support something or whatever. It's like that stuff is going to be around for a long time.
And of course, here's the other thing is when that sort of anecdotal information starts circulating, you kind of can't get away from it. So for someone like me who never ever updated to Windows Vista, I was like, well, why would I?
Yeah.
I hear all of this terrible stuff about Vista. XP does what I need it to do, so I'm not going to update. And so even if Microsoft end up going in and resolving all the issues and making it all perfect, it's very hard to come back from that because of all this information. It's like, everyone's walking around saying, oh, no, Vista is shit. It may not be anymore. They might have fixed everything.
First impressions are everything.
Yeah, that's right.
Hard to crawl back from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mean like Apple Maps?
Hey.
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point with Apple Maps.
That is an excellent segue.
If it's like by mistake like that, it comes up and it uses it, I'll use it. But that wasn't the case a few years ago.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I still use I use Google Maps for my navigation. And I have a very specific reason for that, and that basically is that I believe there are more devices out there using it, and so therefore their traffic information that then's feeding back into the database. So in other words, all of these phones that might be sitting in a car, unmoving car in traffic, they feed back into the database to say there is congestion on this road. Why don't you go around this way? So for me, for that instant response to traffic stuff, a car crash in a tunnel or a breakdown or something like that, when it comes to that instant response to traffic, which is one of the main reasons why I use, a sort of navigation system, because I rarely travel to places that I don't know where they are. Most of the travels that I do are to places that I've been to before, but I still use, Google Maps for that trip in case it finds a problem with the traffic and says, well, get off here because there's an accident up there. We can go around it, and that has happened to me a few times where it has done that, and it's saved me a shitload of time. So that is the main reason why I use it. Now, initially when Apple Maps came out, it was a very different story, and it was terribly inaccurate. That's my understanding. Do you guys have any other understanding as to the problems with it?
Well, as far as it just not being ready, I mean, it was. I remember right around the time it came out, it had been out for, I don't know, maybe a couple, 3 months, and my sister and her husband moved back to where I live from another state, and said. And they said, "Can you come over and watch our animals while we go and get some furniture or something?" I think that was some situation like that. And I said, "Sure." So I was like, "Oh, I just got this new iPhone. I think it was an iPhone 5. I think I had just gotten it." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll use Apple Maps and I'll go." And it directed me to an open field with a pond in it, and it wasn't anywhere close to where they were staying when they moved back here. And I looked at it and I said, what the hell? And so I switched over to, I think it was either Google Maps or Waze, one or the other. I was miles away from where I was supposed to be. And then I get a text for her, "Where are you at?" And I said, "I'm sitting next to a pond because Apple Maps told me you lived here." So I said, "I'm never using this again." And I did test it a few more times over the next year or two, and I got similar results. And I just said, "Screw it, I'm not going to use it." And I've heard that they have updated it substantially, but like we were just talking about, you get that bad rep, and people just say, "No, I'm not going to bother with it. I don't need the hassle." So
I've never used it at the time where it was having all the issues. I use it all the time now, and rarely, if ever, do I have an issue. Me and my neighbor, we go out all the time, and he has an Android, and he uses Google Maps. And the amount of times where I have to step in with Apple Maps because we're going the wrong direction or it can't find the address, almost every time. So
that's funny.
It's come a long way, but I don't have any experience with when it was shit.
Yeah, I mean, I know my sister uses Apple Maps. She is someone who wasn't even aware of the problems that it was having, because I think by the time she got a phone that could use it or whatever the case may be, it was all fixed up. And then she swears by it. She says, "Oh, it's fantastic. Gets me where I need it. It's awesome." I've often found that Google Maps sometimes does things where it'll take you in a particular direction. You think, "Why are we going this way?" Mm-hmm. And you sort of wonder, it's like, it's really much quicker if we go this way. And sometimes it just it does that. I mean, other times I can get, it'll stuff me up. I'll look at a particular direction. I'll go, "Why are we going this way?" So I'll ignore it and go the other way, and then find there's a massive traffic jam in the middle of where I'm actually going. So
that's happened to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
I do recall that comparing Apple Maps to Google Maps, when they just started doing the 3D maps, and you compare it, and on Google it looks pretty good, and Apple Maps it's just a mangled building with the door on the top floor and a window in the sidewalk, and it's a complete mess. I don't know if they figured that one out yet, but yeah, that was embarrassing.
Yeah, I tend not to use that.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of ambitions for like the 3D views of buildings and things like that. And the famous case, I think even I think it was in Australia, someone was getting directions and they ended up in the middle of like nowhere, and they had to be rescued or something like that. But I mean, I remember using it early on, just because it was like the new thing to try out. And I just stayed with using Waze, and then Waze got bought by Google, and so I just use Google Maps or Waze whenever I'm driving around. But it's one of those things where sometimes I'll use it accidentally, or when you ask your Siri or whatever to drive you directions, it'll default to Apple Maps. So on my phone, it'll do that. And I do like the turn-by-turn buzzing. Like if you have an Apple Watch, like it'll be like, okay, you got to turn here. You know, I do like that sometimes. But it's one of those things where I'll use it if I have to. But I still have that preference of Google Maps exactly for the reason that you were saying, Bruce. The traffic data is there, and all of those devices that are using Google Maps are pinging Google to say, hey, you know, we're going X amount of speed in this zone, or there's a cop here, or there's an accident there. And I would rather have that than, you know, not. So that is the reason why I usually put the map on, even like you said, you know where you're going, but you just want it there in case there's a breakdown or something you have to be aware of.
Yeah, or police or something like that.
That's the information you want to know. And until Apple Maps has parity with that, I think people are just going to use what they're used to. And it's the same thing like we all have experienced with Safari. We were all PowerPC users and early adopters of playing around with what it was. And Safari, you know, they were neck and neck in the early days, and then Chrome and Firefox just were like, well, we're doing this, we're doing that. We got a lot more developers. Our stuff is better than ever. And now I hardly touch Safari. I use it on my phone, but not really on the desktop.
I still use Safari for almost everything except for what we're doing right now because it's not supported with this software that we're using. So I'm using Chrome for this right now. But on the whole, I use Safari mainly because, well, two reasons. One, I don't feel it's as big a memory hog as some of the other ones. And the other is I do find it zippier. I do find it, you know, a faster browser. But of course, what you then also have to remember is that these days, I mean, in the olden days, for a web developer, someone like me, what we used to have to do is anything that we did, we would have to test it on Internet Explorer 5 and Internet Explorer 6, and then we'd have to test it on Chrome and with Firefox, and you'd have to go and test it all on this to make sure it's all fine. These days, as long as it works on Chrome, I'm fine. I don't have to worry about it. I mean, if it works on Chrome, no one's going to complain to me. No one's going to come and say, "Oh, I tried it on Firefox and it looks a little bit different." It's like, yeah, try Chrome.
Yeah. So you got a computer from like 2006. I can't install the latest version.
I mean, that is an exaggeration, of course. I mean, basically, as far as I could concern, it should look the same on all those.
Now we know what Bruce's customer service looks like.
Bruce is walking back.
Try it on Chrome.
But I can tell you that there are a lot of developers that do see things that way. Here is a classic example of the software we're using now, which is StreamYard. They basically say you've got to use it's Chrome or Firefox, I think, and they're unapologetic about it not working on the other browsers. They don't care. How much are they charging you, Steve?
I think we're grandfathered into a bit of a price cut. I think it's about $400 a year.
Given the fact that they don't even show the price on their website anymore, I figure it must be horrendous.
Yeah, there's that little management change that occurred a few months ago. And I'm just saying, I'm glad I still have the discount. You reminded me I had to put that on my taxes.
With now just very quickly with Apple Maps, just jumping back, I believe someone actually lost their job, or some people lost their job because of the Maps debacle. Is that correct?
I'm sure. Yeah, why not?
Sure.
I vaguely recall that whoever was in charge of it was doing interviews, and I think it was he just kept doubling down that everything is fine, everything will be great, and then never saw his face again.
He got lost.
What pissed me off most about Maps, and I don't know if that was the same time, but that was not the really Maps' fault. It was iOS. What was it called? That skeuomorphism. That made me hate every app on my phone. So that made it worse for Maps, probably.
So it was Scott Forstall. If you go back and watch some of the old Apple, what do they call those things where they have all of the product releases? Keynotes, that's the word. If you go back and watch the Apple keynotes, you'll see Scott Forstall in a lot of those those keynotes, and then of course at a certain point, you won't see him again.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
really.
had to pull up a picture. I didn't remember, and now I see that.
After Jobs passed, he did not last too long. I think he was Steve Jobs' buddy, and he was being defended by him for a lot of things.
The thing that used to always get me about him when he was in the keynotes, whenever he was saying processes, he used to say processes. like it was a word that ended in I instead of EWS, and I used to hear him say it, and it really pissed me off.
Well, he came from
that's coming from the Australian that can't say no.
He was at Next with Steve Jobs, so he came from Next to Apple. So I forgot.
Wow,
yeah.
Goodness.
He hung around there for a while. We shouldn't feel too bad for him. I'm sure he has billions of stock options, so he's good.
Apparently, Apple CEO Tim Cook issued a public apology for the app's issues, but Forstall reportedly refused to sign the apology letter. Okay. Yes. Alrighty. So, well, we've talked about Apple Maps. I feel like we're on a roll here with Apple bashing. So,
I have one.
Yep.
Since we're talking about Scott Ratface, wasn't he closely involved with the iPhone 4? I believe he was.
Is that?
I guess, but he was more of the software side.
He was the software dude. Yeah. I don't think he was involved.
Mr. Skeuomorphism?
Yeah.
Well, he was there to say, I'm trying to build a Segway to the iPhone 4, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
No,
just roll with it.
Wrong. Actually,
now, I feel like if we're heading towards the iPhone 4 path, we're about to start talking about some reception issues. Would that be a fair assessment?
I just remember getting my free case that fell apart like a month after I got it.
The bumper?
Yeah, I got it. Well, I didn't have the Apple bumper. I was on a business trip at the time, and the only place I could get a phone case, because they had this free phone case program to absolve these reception issues because you're holding the damn phone wrong. And so they had this program where you could either get a case from Apple or one of their providers. And so you could either walk into an AT&T or cellular store at the time and get a case. And of course, Apple was sold out, so I had to go to the AT&T store. And they had the only case they had was this weird fabric like backing type thing. But I just had the brand new phone. And I'm like, I need to get a case for this damn thing, because I didn't really have a good case on it. That thing fell apart within like a few weeks. It was terrible.
The bumper was crap too. The little power button. If you were on the phone and you were walking, all you heard was the rattling of the buttons. And it was terrible.
Oh.
Well, see, the reason I didn't get the bumper is I don't think it even protected the front of the back. It was just the corners of the
No, just the antenna, yeah.
Yeah.
We've kind of got the cart in front of the horse here. Jay, would you like to give us some background on this issue?
Well, putting me on the spot here and trying to remember what the iPhone 4 looked like.
Square one.
Right. It's actually one of my favorite phones, even though they had apparently some design issues with the antenna, the outer band of the phone being the antenna, and it was in 3 sections. They were separated by a very thin plastic piece. It would go all around the phone, and if you held the phone a certain way, your fingers would bridge the gap between the different antennas, and your signal would just nosedive. But it was all our fault. If you remember.
Yeah. You're holding it wrong.
Because we were holding it wrong.
Yeah. Well, I have to confess, I think that's probably right, because I had an iPhone 4 and I never had any reception issues with it. So I was clearly holding it right. So I guess
Bruce was holding it with his pinky up.
That's confirmation. Come on, I don't have small hands. I've got these great big, sausage hands. I mean, come on. If anyone's going to be,
you just never had proper reception to begin with. You just didn't know any better.
He was magnifying the signal. All the solder, leaded solder that's in Bruce's veins, it was just like making it better.
Yeah, I think they offered the bumper because, of course, there was a public outcry. People were outraged because they were 1 bar less of signal if you tried really hard.
They made that whole deal. Like Jobs was on stage saying, we recalculated the software so the bars are now better and more accurate, and all the things that they were trying to sell.
Yeah, there were software patches where they adjusted the attenuation, or they just made the bar the signal bar thingy lie to you.
Yeah.
It just didn't report it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember them actually saying they've sort of resolved it with software, which of course it's kind of funny if the problem is hardware, but yeah.
But it was such a hot topic that when the iPhone 4S came out and then the iPhone 5, there were still YouTube videos of people gripping it. So, oh, the issue is still here. And every phone, if I do that with my iPhone, whatever I have, I don't know, probably still, if I grip it enough, I'll lose a bar of signal because, that's just the way antennas work.
Hello.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to confess, I have never had a phone without a case. I'm just too fucking clumsy. That's that. I guess that is probably part of it as well. If every phone I've ever had has been in a case, then I've got this case here that I've got at the moment has a very special feature.
Wow.
That's my AT&T bumper right there. There you go.
I 3D printed some of my own phone cases, and it was cute until I tried to put them on, and I just shredded them.
Yeah.
That was the last of that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I had also 3D printed some phone cases, and it's a real novelty because you can put your own designs into the back of it or something. You can stick your company logo in there or that sort of rubbish. But ultimately, that material, the PLA material, doesn't make for a particularly good phone.
I had to use TPU, else it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But the iPhone 4 antenna, while I personally never had a problem, I lived in a big city, which, blanket coverage by AT&T at the time. So I always had 5 bars. It never bothered me, but it's one that will be remembered, definitely.
I sure got my free case out of it. That's all I remember. The problems.
Yeah. Well, we had so many people come in to the store where I worked. Oh yeah, antenna. I heard that we get a free bumper. And we started asking the people, like, are you actually having the issue? No, but I'm getting a free bumper. Okay, so we had a giant bin behind the Genius Bar. Like, here you go, pick a color. And just handing them out. We had to note it in the system so that people could not show up for the same serial number multiple times. But we just, like Oprah Winfrey, one for you, just handing them out.
You got a bumper. Well, I just sort of had a quick little look at this in our list here of iPhone 4 antenna.
You said quiddle
list. And I noticed an entry underneath iPhone 4, which I think I'm going to probably talk about now.
If we're talking about that, we're talking about the first one on the list too.
Well, what about the fucking Newton? Leave me high and dry here.
It's been an hour and a half. It's still no Newton.
I'm borrowed time here, folks.
All right. Let's go. Okay, so, I think under those circumstances, that was an excellent segue, Steve. So let's talk about the Newton. All right, so we're going back in history now. Of course, most of the ones we've been talking about have been relatively recent tech history. Now we're going back to the 90s. And of course, this is a product which ended up in, popular culture. It featured in The Simpsons and whatnot.
Hey, Dolph, take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin.
And we're talking about the Apple Newton. Now, one could definitely argue the Apple Newton was before its time in terms of the capability that it had, and then also in terms of some of the products that came after it, which were very, very similar in nature. But the Apple Newton was one of the very early PDAs, personal digital assistants, and the main factor of the Newton was the fact that it had handwriting recognition. So it had a stylus, it had a touch-sensitive screen, and you could write things on it. You could press buttons with the stylus. And I think the main thing was the fact that it had this handwriting recognition. Yeah. But that was also the problem. So, Steve, can you add to that?
Sure. So Newton was a PDA that came out in 1993. Apple released it. They had a lot of people from the company involved, some from the original Macintosh team or closely related to, and it was a very cutting edge product as they were trying to build this gadget that would be like your portable computer, but it was also reliant on syncing with your desktop or your laptop. So, think of it like you have a phone, but your contacts and everything live on your desktop. Your email lives on your desktop, and you're syncing it over. And so this thing was in the skunk works, I'm sure, for ages and ages. But as these processors got faster and as things got smaller, they were able to miniaturize this handheld into a product. And it's quite innovative. They had an ARM processor in there, which are very popular these days. But it had its drawbacks. It was quite a clunky device. But in those days, there wasn't anything that small. It wouldn't be for a few years that would have the capabilities of this thing. But it was expensive. It was slow. The first iterations of it were not really impressive as far as the handwriting recognition. And towards the end of its life, just as things were getting good, that's when Jobs came back and he axed the project. So, there are reports that say John Scully said that Newton was actually, giving them, funds. It was a successful product towards the end of it. You had the eMate, which was a spinoff of it, which was basically a Newton in the laptop form. That was a cheap laptop for education that apparently schools enjoyed, and they were going to release different colors of them and all this stuff. But I think what's very interesting to look back on the Newton is it was just before the internet exploded. So the Newton was a communications device pre-internet. You could fax from it. You could beam infrared things back and forth. You connect via serial printers and computers and infrared printers and stuff like that. But it could take phone calls for you with the modem and all this stuff. But this was before the internet. So during the development of the Newton project, and as new models came out, the internet was becoming a thing. So the Newton 2000 implemented, because it had expansion slots and things, you could have a modem card that you could put in there, or a wireless card eventually that you could put in there, or a pager card. And it was sort of adapting to these new things. But, it was discontinued in 1998. In 1996, the Palm Pilot was just beginning. And they solved the handwriting problem that instead of trying to guess everybody's handwriting, and everyone's handwriting is very different. People are cursive or they write, perfect letters and this and that. The Palm Pilot folks took a different approach, and they invented graffiti, which was actually available on the Newton as a package, I believe, for you to download. But they made you learn an alphabet that you could then very quickly adapt to and write and write and write. And it was actually pretty good. You could actually get around with it. So, that was just one of those growing pains of a device where it could offer a lot of things. It was technically a pretty neat little thing for a little black and white computer. It lasted pretty long on the battery, had expandability and all this stuff, but I think it was just way too early for that type of thing that people were willing to shell out a few $100 for.
So, do you think it was released too early?
I think if it would have been released, like if they would have had like seen, look, this whole web thing is coming, let's retool this a little bit for the internet, not make it as like a reliable thing for like, it has to be connected to your desktop or your laptop. Like what they eventually did with the iPod Touch, where you could just buy the damn thing, set it up, and you'll be good to go. If this was more of like a cell phone or a pager, where it had a service that it communicated through, you would have alleviated a lot of the growing pains of like, well, this is a computer, but I still need the other thing. Or, this is my portable, sales book, but I still need the desktop back at the office. Unless you were really keen in with faxes and wireless stuff, like which most businesses weren't, you still had a laptop or a desktop you sunk to. And that was fine. I mean, we were still tied to those devices. But I think if it was to be a blow-away product, like that, they could have really leaned in on that stuff, which they just couldn't have seen coming. It was just way too early.
Didn't you have and I might be confusing products here, don't you have a video where you try to send something over infrared from a Newton to a printer or something like that?
I did try and do that, and the printer, I don't think the adapter was working. So, but I have a printer right next to me that's supposed to be able to do that as well. But this was just early days of that type of stuff. We're talking 1993, 1994. And the original models, they didn't have a backlight, and they got faster and a little bit better. And they're fun to play around with, but it's just one of those things where I think if it was to be released a few years later, you would have had a completely different product. I mean, and it's not just Apple who went through this. General Magic, which was another spin-off type thing, they did the same thing. This was just as the internet was becoming a thing. They had their own little portable device type deal, and that died on the vine too. It's just they were too expensive of these little devices. And then a few years later, these Palm Pilots come out, and they're like drastically half the price of the damn thing, and it's smaller. It fits in your pocket.
What did Palm Pilot do right that Apple did wrong?
I think the price point was there, and I also think the portability factor. The Newton you could fit in a jacket pocket, you couldn't put it in your pants pocket. You know,
Yeah.
the Newton, the Palm Pilot was maybe the size of, 3/4 the size of your iPhone today. You know, it was a pretty remarkable small product, ran on AA batteries. They got the cost at the right price, and I think that there were a lot of people flocking to that because they saw the promise of like, hey, here's this little thing. It's not too much, so I'm going to buy it just as a toy. You know, I'm not
Yeah.
spending $800 on it like a Newton or whatever the price was.
So for the people out there, again, relating to another show we've done in the past about gadgets, for the gadget freaks out there, they could satisfy their desire for a gadget with a Palm Pilot, but when they look at the price of a Newton, they're like, nah, I'm not getting that just for the novelty value.
Yeah. I'm going to look up the price here.
So I don't own a Newton, but I think, Dana, you have a Newton?
I acquired one as part of a sale that I was picking up. I think Jay went with me to that one. But the guy was like, I think I was buying, what was it? A PowerBook G3 or something. And he goes, I've got this Newton and I don't even know if it works. And it's pretty beat up. I mean, but he had the documentation and the book and all that stuff. So I was like, okay, well, and I brought it home and I put it on a shelf and it's still there.
Well, here's the pricing just for fun. August 1993, the first Newton, $700 US dollars. 1996, the first Palm Pilot, $299, with the professional model at $399. So you can see that is just such like that's like just gadget money. Like I'm just
to compare when the first iPhone came out in 2006, it was $600.
Oh yeah,
so,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course, $700, I assume, would have been a little bit more back then as well.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
In '93, $700 was pretty much. Well, I'm not going to buy that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
you could get a whole used computer for $700 in 1993. Jeez.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's probably I mean, Steve Jobs basically just ended it. Yeah.
Yeah, they were cutting fat from Apple, all the printers and all the other accessories that they were doing at the time. So the Newton was part of that. There was even a demonstration to try and save it at the parking lot.
Okay.
It's all fun to look back on their documentaries about it and all that fun stuff, but it's way too early.
The other thing about the Newton, with the fate that it ended up having, it's become very collectible.
Sure.
I think it's a nice little collectible piece of computing history, and then obviously people like us can then sit around and talk about what could have been or what should have been, as the case may be. So,
sure, there's a lot of dedicated fans to that little device, and I don't blame them. It's a very unique thing with its own operating system, its own methodology, but I think it was just too ahead of its time.
I definitely won't say that. The Newton was a tech fail because it sucked. It wasn't. It was a decent thing for the time, but it didn't fail because it was like that little pin thing that we talked about earlier.
It just kind of didn't find its footing, kind of thing. Yeah, we all accept that there was a very good level of technology in it, to some extent, a little bit like what we're talking about with the Google Glass. The technology is sound. It's just there are these other factors that are stopping it from being, potentially being able to be the next big thing.
It didn't suck like Apple clones did.
Speaking of another thing that almost killed the company, sure.
So clones. Now, look, seriously, it's crazy for me talking about this. I really should just hand it over to Steve. Steve, Apple clones, WTF?
I don't even know why they're on this list.
Well, it was back when Apple was, not to a healthy financial position, and they were trying to increase the macOS market share. Microsoft had Windows, of course, which would run on any PC, and there was really a race to the bottom as far as getting a computer into someone's home or a business. And with PCs, they could just build these metal boxes. They could buy the Windows license from Microsoft or ship it with DOS or without an OS at all, and just get these boxes out there. Just get a Pentium class board with a keyboard, with the mouse, with a VGA 640 by 480 monitor, and just ship it out there for maybe $1,000 or so. And you had the opposite problem with Apple. You had to buy a whole package. The cheaper of the cheapest machines were on like 2-3-year-old processors like the Mac LCs and stuff like that. And they were really just shooting themselves in the foot as far as, Apple had a certain markup that they had their products on. Mm-hmm. And what is it, like 200, 400%, whatever it was back then, that they were comfortable at making those profits in the late 80s and early 90s. But by the time, Windows 3.1 and Windows 95 just came out, that GUI was good enough for most people. Most businesses, most schools, or people who were just getting a computer for the home, that was $1,000 or so cheaper than buying a Macintosh computer. So people went with that. And as people warned inside of the company beforehand that the Macintosh OS was the secret sauce and the usability of that's what made the Mac unique. And that was not going to stick around for long with all these competitors and the patents and all that crap, So the problem was that, Apple was doing pretty poorly. And for years in the company, there have been calls to, let's license the OS like Microsoft does. And just, we'll get a cut of the pie. But anybody who makes a piece of hardware that meets these specifications can run the OS. And so eventually, Scully and Spindler, higher ups at Apple at the time, decided to go this route. And starting in 94 to 95, they had all these licensing deals and discussions and whatever. And so you had these Macintosh compatible computers that had the same processor, same ROM chips, boards designed by Apple, all this sort of stuff to make these computers that could run the Mac OS. And they were called Macintosh clones because there were all these PC cloners, that's a whole other discussion. But you had these Macintosh clones. And for better or worse, most of them were pretty decent machines. And Apple, they got, I think, $50 per sale of these computers in one of the contracts that they originally had. But the problem was that as the technology evolved and as these clones kept getting faster and faster, they were available for cheaper costs for a faster machine than what Apple was putting out. Mm-hmm. And the problem was this is where Apple made most of its money, from those really high-end systems where you would configure the best memory and graphics and so on. And so this was just really eating into Apple's profits and where they were, their bread and butter.
But aren't we expanding the market share?
Exactly. And so while I believe it was proven that it was like slightly helping, it was just like giving them a wallop financially. And so, this went on for a number of years. I think there was attempts to curb in like, hey, look, like, just you can't outpace us as speed and price. Like you're murdering us too much. And there was an agreement, I believe, with UMac, Supermac, where they said you can't make the faster machines anymore. You could have this lower end market. Like that's fine. Like you go after that. But not all companies agreed with them. Power Computing was one of the clone manufacturers. They're famous marketing things you should look up. And they were some of the best machines. That and the UMax ones were really solid.
They were the most successful clone maker.
Yeah. And because they were producing PCs before they got into the clone business, so they knew what they were doing. And their marketing was fantastic. When they got yelled at by Apple, they had ads that were like, we got fined for speeding or something like that. Because their machines were faster. They had dual processors. They were doing this and that. And these Mac clones, not only was the hardware cheaper, but they would bundle in Photoshop. They would bundle in a modem. They would bundle in stuff that would make you think, well, if I buy a Macintosh 7500 or 9600 or whatever, I'd have to pay another $500 for a monitor alone. This comes with one. So everything that you were getting upcharged for from Apple, you weren't from the clone manufacturers. And yes, there was the downside of that. Maybe you didn't get the best support. Maybe the power supply in there wasn't the best thing. Maybe you had some odd compatibility. You had to run some special version of Mac OS 7.6 or whatever to resolve these bugs. And you got a laundry list of appendixes of like known issues for these systems. But in the end, it did the opposite that Apple would hope for. It didn't save the company.
For the people, it was still worth it, though. I mean, sure, it's the same reason that over the last few years, even I considered building a Hackintosh. I mean, now there's other ways to get macOS running on unsupported hardware, but it's like, okay, I haven't agreed with your hardware choices since 2012. I might build my own. And okay, there will be bugs, there will be stuff that isn't working, but it might be worth it.
I worked in a pre-press studio for many, many years, from like about with a brief break in the middle, but from about 1989, I think, from about 1989 onwards. And so obviously with that, always working with Macs within that studio. So when we started off, we were talking about 68030 type Macs, even a couple of, even slower than that, then into the 68040, then into the PowerPC. Always a Mac studio. Always. Every single piece of hardware in the place is Mac. We had to have like a couple of PCs just for some clients and that. But ultimately, everyone in the place is working on Macs in that joint. When the clones arrived, every single piece of Apple hardware was replaced with clone hardware. Now, we were a company that was going to buy Mac stuff if that was our only option to get it. We weren't going to veer away from the operating system. It had so many benefits for our industry. It was clearly the better option for us to use. So that was, we were absolute rock solid customers. But when the power computing, when the clones came out, and I mentioned power computing because they were probably the main ones. We had some UMacs as well, but it was mainly power computing. I personally bought a Power Tower Pro, I think it was a 180, and that was my computer for many years. But it was an interesting thing. At a particular point in time, you could have walked into our place and not seen a single Mac computer in there. You would have just seen nothing but clones. But there was another thing that I also think was really interesting with these, and again, this is from a time in history. Pretty much all of these power computing computers were at a time when the CPU was on a daughter card. Now, of course, Apple doesn't do that anymore, and in the past, Apple didn't do that. But during this little piece of history, this time, Apple had computers that had a daughter card. So not only did I end up buying a power computer instead of a Mac computer, I now had a computer where X amount of years down the track, a company like Newer Technology comes along, releases a G3 daughter card for this, and I can essentially make this computer last for another however many years by giving it a CPU update. It had loads and loads of RAM slots in it, so once again, I could make it last even longer by loading it up with loads more RAM. I could put a faster hard drive in it. So this was something that wasn't just that it was faster technology than Apple in the first place. It was also expandable, incredibly expandable. So I ended up having that power computer last way longer than any computer I'd had in the past because I souped it up to a G3 at a later date. So that to me was another, I guess, issue that Apple got themselves into by having these clone computers. But ultimately, clones didn't last.
Yeah. So I mean, they were not doing Apple any favors, so they were causing the company to squash it before Jobs came back. But Dana, please.
If I have a hard time putting them on this list though, because ultimately, yes, they went away. Ultimately, they did do harm to Apple in a way. But had they not licensed the clones, Apple would have died. That's my firm belief, because I think the two previous quarters, I'm just going by memory here, I think one quarter they lost $480 million. The next quarter they lost over almost $700 million. And they weren't the big tech giant like they are today. So they had all these projects in the mix. They had the Newton, they had the printers and the monitors and the OS and the Macs. And oh my God, did they have a lot of Macs. And of course, charging way too much for every single one of them. And half of their stuff, like their printers and their monitors, were all based on somebody else's technology, like Canon or HP or, Sony. But without the clones, because I remember when the whole cloning thing first started, Power Computing was like, they were like right there with Apple, and they had a campaign. It's called Fight Back for the Mac, and they had this little guy with like, putting his fists up, and I still have a lot of that stuff. So they brought a lot more attention to the platform, even while the hardware itself was probably causing Apple some headaches and to ultimately lose money because they were too stubborn to lower their own prices. So
yeah, and I think it was just also a time where Apple was sort of stuck in the mud. Like, they were trying to do so many things, but they were also trying to move forward. They were trying to reinvent the OS with macOS Copland and all this stuff, and they were just way too bogged down with all these things happening at the time, where the clones they thought would elevate them. I think it was a kick in the ass for them. And I think as a company, they sort of needed that competition to realize, holy crap, what are we doing here? We need to really simplify this. Right. And that's what would lead, Jobs to come back, make that famous, four, square thing of like, we're going to have a pro desktop, we're going to have a standard desktop, we're going to have a pro laptop, we're going to have a standard laptop. Right. Because like you were saying, they had so many different models under different names for different, companies and for education, all this stuff, the same damn system. It was confusing. So I think like at the end of the day, they really helped it. And, instead of a company saying, you know what, we're not a Mac shop anymore, we're closing up, we're going to Windows or whatever they were going to do, they weren't going to pay for Mac OS updates, which you still had to do it today. They were going to pay software from Adobe or whoever to support that company from still making Mac software, etc. The
clones basically bridged the gap. Sorry, Jay, but just real quick, they basically bridged the gap from, hey, we're losing tons of money and we are really in serious trouble, to then Jobs coming back and Microsoft investing $150 million in the company and whatever else, and then slashing the product line, like you just said, which ultimately did turn things around. But they bridged that gap where they kept the brand, the platform alive, I think, for those several years.
I'm looking at a list here of computers available that Apple was selling in 1995. And I'm imagining myself walking into a computer shop saying, so I'm just looking here and I'm just wondering, can you tell me which one would be better for me? The Performer 6205 CD, the 6210 CD, the 6214 CD, the 6216 CD, the 6218 CD, the 6220 CD, or the 6230 CD? Now, which one do you think will be best for me? And I can just imagine the guy in the shop
Which one is easier to pronounce for you?
I don't fucking know. I just don't fucking know.
So I have two questions about this and my timeline, because I'm not familiar with it. Would it be fair to say that doing that licensing, even though it kind of hurt them, kept them alive until the late 90s when the iMac kind of solidified them being back? Or
that's what I mean by bridging that gap, because you're talking about from 94 or 95 till Steve came back in 98 or 99. There was a few years there where
well, we might sort of say, okay, well, this wasn't the fail that we're potentially making it out to be. I guess where it does become a tech fail is simply that if Apple's intention was to increase market share, in that sense, it was a complete failure.
Right. Yeah.
So it wasn't actually growing. You weren't in a situation where there used to be 5% max and then now there were 10% max. It was now like 5.1% or something like that. So in that regard, I think that is the fail part of it. But the point you make is obviously a very valid thing, that it possibly was the thing that just kept some what would you call it, optimism, so to keep Apple going just that little bit longer until things did start
the
to slow
lights
down.
on. And the second question, as Steve mentioned something about an operating system, Copland, Copyland. What was that all about?
That was going to what eventually would become Mac OS 8. So they had a lot of internal groups within Apple were trying to, System 6 was like, just supporting every new Mac that came out with like little patches here and there. System 7 was a big overhaul, but during that time after System 7, and they had these incremental updates, the future of the Mac OS was something that was a hot topic, and they were going to do multitasking and have a better kernel and all
memory.
stuff, protected memory, all the things that these new Linux OSs were trying to take stabs at, and Windows was looking into these things, and the Mac was not the only GUI based operating system anymore. So they had to really step up their game. So there were all these futuristic things that they were looking at, and it's Project Pink and Blue and all these things you can look at Wikipedia about to see. But I think the main thing is that they spent so much R&D money into these OSs, and really they didn't come out with too much. If you look at Mac OS 8, sure, it has these improvements and has a fresh coat of paint on it, but what is the main difference between that and System 7.6?
I think when you say Copland was meant to be OS 8, and we know OS 8 came out, I think it's fair to say OS 8 is not Copland.
Exactly.
OS 8 is a Band-Aid on System 7. So.
Yes. In fact, it was supposed to be 7.7. So the whole thing, when Jobs came back and all the clone contracts said System 7 or 7.5 in them or whatever. And when Jobs came back, he said, hey, we got to renegotiate. These deals are killing Apple. All the clone companies told him to go pound sand because they had no obligation to do it. They're like, we're making money. We're fine. This is a you problem. And so he rewrote the software license agreement. He didn't rewrite it. What he did is he renamed the Mac OS. So instead of 7.7, it was Mac OS 8. So all their contracts were null and void. They no longer had the ability to run the latest OS. And of course, that was a killer thing at the time, still is today. So, one by one, a few companies did come back and renegotiate. Power Computing was one of them. Umax was one of them. And so, they could run Mac OS 8. But it was one of these things where they were unwilling to negotiate. They had a good thing going. And it was just, that's what happened with the deals.
I mean, it's very interesting to note that, because again, this is for people that may not necessarily have used a computer of that vintage, but if you were using System 7 and you had, I don't know, a memory leak in an application or something like that, and you would end up with a system bomb, unimplemented trap. There's a little plug in. That was it. Your computer, you had to restart your computer. There would be often a little restart button there, but you'd click it and nothing would happen.
Sometimes even that wouldn't work. Yeah,
you would end up having to press the soft, soft restart button on the hardware in order to get the computer started up. So in other words, even though you could run multiple applications, never did memory sharing particularly well, but you could have multiple applications running, one would crash, and that would usually take out everything. And the interesting thing about that is something that really persisted for a very, very long time. And again, just looking at it from the history lesson part of view, the whole idea with Copland was that it was going to be something that would introduce these things. It would introduce these added benefits of, making it so that if one application crashed, only one application crashed and you didn't lose everything. You could keep working on the other applications in the background. Also multitasking. I mean, if, as we're starting to move into a world with multiple CPUs, having an operating system that can go in and utilize these multiple CPUs, because System 7 did not do that very well at all. And so the whole idea was to get, it was that next step. It was bringing it, up to date with, as Steve said, as these other things that were starting to come out. And an important thing to remember is we ended up having System 8, and then, of course, we ended up having System 9, and these things were around for a long time. It wasn't until System 10 came out that we actually started to get some of these things in the Mac world. And, of course, that didn't come from Copland. That came from Next.
Rhapsody.
Yep.
Rhapsody
that came from
Next,
that.
right.
Yeah. And so it's, where I feel like Copland is one of the biggest fails. I mean, apart from the fact they poured huge amounts of money into it, never ended up with an actual operating system they sold, and they didn't even end up using that in the long run anyway. I mean, they've basically just shelved that and went down a different road.
Right.
So I mean, that there's the fact that it never actually saw the light of day, I think it's got to be one of the biggest fails out there.
Copland was kind of an example of it was a microcosm of what was wrong with Apple at the time, because when you look at the lineup of Macs that they had, there was no direction there. You had some sort of semblance of performers are for the home, and the Power Macs are for, business or artists or, graphics houses, things like that. But there were so many different models that it just became this muddled mess. And that's kind of what happened with the organization around Copland. I remember at the time, any little bit of news or screen grabs or anything that came out about Copland, people just ate it up because they're like, "Oh man, this is going to be so great!" There was an app at the time called Kaleidoscope that you could use to change your entire theme of your desktop and your icons and sounds and everything. And they came out with one that was Copland themed, and people just ate it up.
I remember that. Yeah.
And it was a really good looking OS. I was so excited for it, and then it just kind of went, and it's like. And then the next thing you hear about is Rhapsody after that. And it's like, well, what is that? Well, it's not even related. So
Apple also had incredible infighting at the time. There were people who,
Right.
where they knew how bad things were. And so there were all these people defending their own departments and putting blame on other departments as to, oh, no, we're making money, they're losing money. And, people fiddling the figures and all that sort of stuff. So you basically had this company that, it's not even necessarily a matter of, all these ridiculous number of products that they were producing. I mean, there are all these people trying to pass blame off to other departments about why the company wasn't doing well. If you listen to each department, the company was making a profit. Everyone's sort of saying, "Oh no, we're making money," but then you look at the bottom line, and it's like, "Well, someone's lying to me."
Yeah, they were losing big time.
Yeah. Anyhow, I mean, look, Copland. You'll find plenty of videos about it because I think there is like a copy of it floating around.
There's a few demos.
Yeah, and there are a few people that have gone in and installed it and actually try, had a go at it. I think Sean might have even been one of them, Sean from Action Retro. But so, I mean, if it's something that interests you, go and have a look at those because, as I say, it is a very interesting time in history. And I guess most importantly, it is also what Apple really needed to do. I mean, if they could have got it to work and could have got it to go on well, it would have been great. But instead, we got stuck with operating systems we got. So,
it was part of how the AIM alliance between Motorola and IBM and Apple was formed. Is they showed a very early version of what eventually would be the ideas for Copland, of this very futuristic 3D faux icon style desktop layout. They showed part of that to IBM running on a rudimentary Intel system at the time, and IBM was like, "This is a great interface. This is better than whatever." Their reason was. They were like, "We want to help you do this if you sign up to use our power chips, which would eventually be the power PC chips in your systems." And it just like all of these little events, I'm convinced that without like some of these earlier things, we would not be where we were with the Mac today, because all of these dominoes had to fall just a certain way in order for this stuff to happen.
Yeah. So they're more. I mean, technically, yes, these projects failed, but they're more of a stumbling block to something better. So
yeah. When you look at the sort of history of a lot of the, I guess, founding computer companies that, ones that existed from the very early days. I mean, obviously you have Apple, one of the very early players, and obviously IBM with their PC that came a little bit later on. And then you look at all the clone manufacturers, and you look at, again, all of these companies that were around in the early days. There are a lot of them still around.
Yeah.
So it is, I guess, we can accept that there was probably a fair bit of luck, and as you say, dominoes falling the right way with a company like Apple, that they did end up surviving. Because I remember at the time when around the 90s, when I had one particular client that just loved PCs, and he would come in and he would rave about PCs and how much he hated Apples and all that sort of stuff. And we were an Apple place, and because I had Apple computers and everything. And I remember him coming in telling me one day, announcing in no uncertain terms that Apple would be gone within 12 months. That they would not exist anymore. And at that particular time, it was a pretty fair prediction.
Yeah, a lot of people were saying that.
Yeah.
If you would have held on to that Apple stock then, you wouldn't have to do anything but your life now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, if we could all go in and buy some stock just around that mid-90s period, just before jobs came back, we wouldn't be having to worry about working or anything like that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be sitting
I
here talking
spent
to you.
every penny I had when he had his liver transplant, and the stock was like...
Yeah.
But yeah, it's... I mean, I just like the Newton and some of the items on these lists, they were necessary, whether they failed or not, they were necessary for future products and services to build on. But there's one that I think it was rebranded a few times. It never really got anywhere, and eventually, after several rebrandings, it was canceled. And that is the WebTV.
Yeah.
Who knows anything about that?
Oh yeah, I played around with one.
Yeah,
You
the
probably
web
have
TV
6 of them in your basement, don't you,
I
Steve?
only have 2. Come on.
Nah, only 2.
Do you have one from before Microsoft bought the company, and then one after?
I did actually have 3. I sold the MSN one to a friend. I think I just gave it to him. I didn't want it anymore.
Yeah.
But my first experience with WebTV is we were in a hotel, and my parents and siblings wanted to go off and do something in a museum or whatever, and I had no interest in doing it. And the only like bargaining chip was I was like being a pain in the ass or whatever, and my parents were like, if you stay put at the hotel, we'll sign you up for an hour of this web TV thing, and you could play games or do whatever the heck. And it was the whole concept behind it for anybody who's listening to this who has no idea what the hell we're talking about.
I have no idea what the hell we're talking about. We never got them here.
It was basically a television set-top box, and the whole idea was you can interact with the brand new thing called the internet on your frickin' television. You don't need to buy a computer. You're going to buy this box that's maybe $200 or whatever. You're going to sign up for a subscription service that gives you a dial-up internet connection, and you're going to have a wireless remote control and later on a keyboard, that you could either come bundled with it or it's an add-on price. And you could do email, and you could do web, and you could look up a TV guide and stuff like this.
It was basically a very early version of what they call smart TVs today.
Exactly, and this technology was so new that obviously dial-up was the main way of getting internet into people's home.
What
so
was
it wasn't
powered
fast
by?
or anything. I think they were. Oh gosh, I want to say ARM.
What was the question?
I got to look this up.
And did they? Did they have any expandability? Could you? Or were they just like a set-top box, a totally sealed unit?
They were pretty.
Yeah, dumb. They were not expandable. I think some of them had like an extra SODIMM or something where you could pop in something like that. But I think a lot of these were
MIPS CPU.
Yeah, the MIPS.
I don't even know what that is.
MIPS,
yeah. So they were really just trying to be like a souped-up cable box with internet functionality. So the whole sell was your parents or your grandparents don't need a computer to get pictures of the kids, that you take with this digital camera that you just got last year, And so this was a thing that was, I think 96 was when they launched, late 96.
Cool. So definitely marketed at people who are resistant to having a computer in the house because it's too tech or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, they've been hearing all this stuff about the internet, or as you say, maybe someone's sharing photos and they want their grandmother to be able to see them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we talk about something that's ultimately is probably going to have a relatively short shelf life, because while they may not have known that at the time, one of the main aims of the computer companies was to A, bring the price down, and B, improve usability, so that in the future, grandma will buy a computer to look at the photos rather than looking for another option. So in that regard, I feel like this is almost like a stopgap product that sort of fills that void between computers. Getting onto the internet with a computer is a real pain in the ass and very difficult. To some extent, it's almost like the gap that the iMac brought in, because the whole idea of the iMac was this is a computer for the internet that you just plug it in and you're on the internet.
One
and
plug
it's easy.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like something like the iMac ends up potentially destroying the market that this thing holds. But did it do well?
I think like originally they were like $350 or so, which again was way cheaper than a decent computer at the time. Yeah, you can get a used one that could barely do whatever, but this was a brand new product. And I think originally they did sell pretty well because Microsoft ended up buying them and doing this whole MSN thing. And there was WebTV, there was WebTV 2.0 and new features and all this junk. There were, I think, boxes that you could plug in to like a cable modem or whatnot. But they were pretty ahead of their time as far as like the limits of the speed that they had. So like you could have a channel guide, you could send messages. There were chat room functionalities and things like that. There were email, and web surfing was obviously the two big killer apps of this thing. And exactly what Bruce was saying, this was a stopgap thing because computers were so pretty expensive back then. This was like, I think 150 megahertz. Some of these topped out at. They weren't fast machines, but they were like purpose built to be easy to get online for grandma or for your mom. And then, yeah, the just the drop in the prices for computers overall a few years after this, just like, why would you buy this thing?
It's a good thing they didn't make it, because that's about the same time that Flash Player came around, and that killed everything. So
they were slow. They had a learning curve, because basically, if you didn't want to use a remote to be navigating around on your TV, you had to buy a keyboard and or a mouse to go with it, which of course they were happy to sell you. So you basically had the computer experience without the computer. So it was kind of like, well, all right. But
it's like a, what do they call it, a Chromebook or something like that? You know, those devices that only give you the internet. So
I mean, these things, they would sell it to you cheap, and then you'd have to buy the keyboard or whatever. So like that's
and
some of them had
internet subscription.
You had to be subscribed to their thing. Some of them had printer ports on it, so you could print. I mean, that's neat, I guess. But like, sign of the times, man.
Did they make the noise when you dialed up? Did they make the?
I do think so. Yes.
If that comes out of your TV, piss yourself.
Well, I mean, you gotta also think about, at this time, like a modem was still $150 purchase. So the idea of getting a computer with a modem that just plugs into something you already have, like a television, for under $400 wasn't exactly the worst deal. I mean, there were all sorts of these weird products at the time, like I think it's the Eye Opener, which was a weird like little computer thing that I think Sean had on his channel. But like all of these little embedded systems, like that were using ARM or MIPS chips or whatever, just to try and get a cheap computer as an appliance into your home. That was just like the mid '90s were full of this crap.
So I guess here's a question. Is it really a tech fail?
I think that Microsoft bought them, and then they were like releasing their set-top boxes, and I just think that it eventually went away. I don't think they really failed, but I don't think it became the success of like an AOL was like an experience. I think they were trying to be like, well, WebTV is going to be this experience. And then you have the problems of like a TV screen fidelity, and the resolution is nowhere near as good as a CRT monitor or whatever. So, you know, there was all these drawbacks, but I mean, I'm sure people were clinging on to them as they shut them off, because that was, if you're not a computer person and that was your window into the world, I mean, maybe you preferred it that way.
So it's sort of it's something that's probably more got just like superseded than it really being a failure. I mean, maybe it ended a little sooner than they wanted, or something like that, or maybe they had some other grand plans for the future and everything. But just listening to the story that you tell of this here, I sort of feel like it did what it set out to do. It got customers, it got people using it. It did service a particular market at the time, but ultimately it kind of outgrew them. I mean, technology has kind of gone on the same path as the internet. I mean, if you think about things like, when you're on the internet these days and you've got a web page that does a full page video running in the background, you just don't even bat an eyeyelid. And yet you take an old computer and you try and run a little bit of video at 320 by 240 pixels, and the thing comes to a grinding halt. That I sort of feel like and things like compressing and decompressing JPEGs, and you can have a web page full of 100 JPEG images and it'll just go, they'll just all come up instantly, because the way computer processing has to become better at doing those things that then service the web, service the internet in that regard. So I kind of feel like something like this, it'll serve us for a certain period of time, but at the end of the day, it's just going to get outgrown by what was going on in the internet. So it sounds like a cool little thing, and I kind of want one now. But
I bought one, and then what is that guy? MJW, I think is the name on YouTube. He did a whole video about everything that I was going to focus on. So he did that.
Okay.
But apparently the service...
Matthew MJD or Michael MJD.
Yeah, that guy. Yes.
You beat me to the punch there.
Yeah, but he did a great video, so go watch that. But apparently the service was only discontinued in 2013, the eventual MSN branding of this WebTV thing. So it was popular enough to last like well over a decade. So
Wow,
I don't think it lasted. It's probably people that had their credit card on auto pay. Like, well, we'll draw this out as long as we can.
Hey,
Yeah,
AOL,
don't tell anyone.
I've been paying for what?
They haven't received
Grandma's-
email in 5 years, but they don't seem to care.
Grandma's been in the ground for a while, but her credit card's still getting paid.
Well, I think we've been going for about 2 hours now, so I think the best thing for us to do is to actually take a break from this, and we'll come back for a part 2. We've still got some fantastic tech fails on our list here, so it'll be well worth coming back for the part 2 show. But for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'll end it here. I'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for watching. Do be sure to put in the comments maybe your ideas for some tech fails. You can check and see whether they're going to be in the next episode. Or if you've got any comments to make about the ones we've covered today, maybe you've got some history with them, you know, some stuff about them, please add those to the comments. It would be greatly appreciated. Once again, a big thank you to Steve, our special guest for the show, which I hope he will join us for the part 2, but we'll have to just wait and see. And of course, as usual, thank you to Dana and Jay for joining us on this show as well. So that is it for this one. Hope to see you at the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
For every minute Dana is late, he owes us $100.
Shit. I hope he doesn't show up.
Hey guys.
Oh, we got an echo. Echo.
Shit pants.
Echo.
You don't need an intro. It writes itself. You're good.
Shh. Okay, I'm going to start now. I'm just making this up on as I go. Hi there, my name is Bruce. No, that's not how I start. That's not how I start.
We're back, baby.
And we're going to talk about the Apple Newton and what a piece of shit it is.
Well, you know, trust is earned, Steve. Trust is
Yeah, we'll blow it out my ass.
So, hang on.
Up
Whoa.
your ass?
Yeah.
The magnet on the back of your shirt, and it would hold it in place. And this was, where did that come from? And this.
Oh shit! You heard that? I'm sorry. I did. I thought I pushed the mute button on my mic. I had to mute myself for like the next 10 minutes because I could not stop laughing.
Yeah, something that's maybe like hyped up is like the thing that's going to change your life. Everybody will be doing this, and then
Like the
just
Segway.
fizzled out. Like the Segway. Yeah.
They were talking about
the
how
students were like throwing things at him. They had to stop using the damn thing.
Segway, I think Segway still exists as a company these days, but they make scooters now. Is that correct? Are they actual
Probably.
upright, weird, wheelie things there?
Yeah, try not to giggle.
Yeah, I'll try not to giggle. Okay, well, I think, who did that?
Dana looks very
Such a
confused
cord
right now.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what the fuck. I didn't touch the damn thing.
Dana, stop pushing buttons.
I didn't push nothing. And now I can't remember what the fuck I was going to talk about.
Okay, well, I think we've probably done an. Oh, that's what I was like. I mean, we do appreciate that no one actually watches our show from start to finish. So,
Right.
Dana, what I was saying before you arrived.
I don't give a shit.
Is because